Hello, and welcome to today's webinar, No Node Sense Ant Management, brought to you by PMP Magazine and our sponsor of the event, Control Solutions, Inc. I'm Hallie Reed from North Coast Media, the Content Marketing Manager for PMP Magazine, and I will be your host for today's presentation. At this time, I'd like to get you comfortable with our council and the ways that you can participate in today's presentation. Please notice the Q&A panel in the lower right-hand side of your console. If you have a question, type it in the panel's text box, then click Submit to place your question in queue. You may also use the hashtag PMPWebinar on Twitter to submit questions during today's webinar or enter into discussions with other attendees. If you experience any technical difficulties during today's event, you may use the same Q&A panel on your screen to submit your issue, and technical support specialist Ellen or I will personally assist you. Finally, you may learn more about today's speaker by viewing their photo, bio, and contact info in the panel located on the right-hand corner of your console. A few last-minute reminders. Make sure your state has approved the CEU. You are required to log in using a device that is not shared with others. And to be eligible for your CEU, you must have entered the code words during the webinar. Those attending who have indicated during registration that they are attending for credit and supplied their license number will receive a quiz link via email. The quiz will also be available through the QR code that is on the screen or the link that is in the box in the upper right-hand side of the console. You must complete the quiz by the deadline on April 16th at 5 p.m. Now I'd like to introduce today's speaker. Today we will be hearing from Brittany Campbell, PhD, BCE, Technical Services Manager, Control Solutions, Inc. Dr. Brittany Campbell has over 12 years of experience in the pest control industry. She was previously the Director of Technical Services for the National Pest Management Association, representing pest control companies in the United States and internationally. Dr. Campbell has extensive experience in research, insecticide resistance, and insect biology, especially bedbugs. In addition, she is passionate about pest control education, training, and stewardship. She completed her master's degree at Virginia Tech and PhD at the University of Florida, with a focus in urban entomology for both programs. In addition, she holds her board-certified entomologist certification with the Entomological Society of America. At this time, I'll turn the presentation over to Brittany. Brittany, take it away.
Wonderful. Thank you, Hallie, for that wonderful introduction. And I see a note here from our organizers. I'm going to try to assist you guys, but I am not an IT person, so I'm literally just going to read this. If you are not seeing the webcam, not that you're really going to miss a whole lot here. It's just me, my face. You can still see the PowerPoint. But if you do want to see the webcam, click on the media player button at the bottom of your screen. All right, with that said, I'm going to jump into why I'm here today to talk about ants. So they're definitely one of my favorite topics. I am constantly learning in this industry, but ants definitely keep me on my toes here. And if you didn't already get that I'm a pretty serious bug nerd just by this title, or if you're new to the industry and you have no idea why in the world I put node sense in this title, I promise you will have a very sincere understanding of my nerdiness by the end of this presentation, because I can talk some decent amount of nonsense, but today I want us to sift through all that ant nonsense and talk about node sense ant management. And you know, our job at the end of the day, we get a call from our customers, is really to kill ants, right? We're in the ant management business, pest management business. But I honestly think it's really important for every PMP out there, everyone in our industry, to have an appreciation for these insects that we control. because when you're having a hard day, a hard infestation, you can't figure out where in the heck is this colony, or why can't I find the source of this problem? By having an appreciation for just how successful ants are, I think you'll feel a little bit better about yourself when you realize, okay, these are incredibly successful insects, and I'm going to have to be persistent and patient and really be a great inspector out there sometimes to figure out what is the problem here. So ants are found all throughout the world. There's this nice little graph or picture down here at the bottom showing just how diverse they are. The more red, darker red color, of course, in the tropic areas is where you have just this really dense number of species, obviously in hotter areas there. That also tends to be where we pick up a good bit of our invasive species as well, coming from some of these tropical areas. But thankfully, so far, they have not figured out how to survive in super salty environments. So they are not swimming around in the ocean, and they do not survive in Arctic super cold temperatures. So don't move to the Arctics if you really like to do ant management. And aside from just all of the, places, how widespread they are and all the places that ants can live in the world, they can actually take advantage of some super specific habitats. So for instance, if you look at this picture in the bottom left, this is a super cool ant in the genus Cephalotes. And they're super cool because where it looks like in that twig there, it kind of looks like there's a nail hole in there. That is actually the head of an ant. It's like these ants almost have like a shield on top of their head. And they will come into these twigs where wood-boring beetles or beetles have already tunneled through the twigs. And they use those tunnels for their colonies. This is where they nest. And then where those wood-boring beetles have popped out, their exit holes there, these ants have evolved these certain shape of head where they can literally plug that hole to keep out predators, other ants, other things from getting into their colony. And then in the middle picture there, we of course have our leafcutter ants. They're really unique, have this special behavior where they'll go and chop up leaves, cut up leaves with their mandibles. And these ants live underground, so they take those leaves underground, and then they actually grow fungus on the leaves. They don't eat the leaves. They grow fungus on the leaves, and they feed on that fungus. And in the bottom right, if I were an ant, this is the one ant I would not want to be. These are the honeypot ants. So where you see those ants kind of dangling from the ceiling there, their sole purpose in life is they have these super strong legs and is to dangle there and basically act like storage units. So the other ants within the colony forage around, pick up nectar, through trophallaxis, spit it up into these, they're called repletes, the hanging storage unit ants. And their sole purpose is just to store that nectar for the colony. And again, why ants tend to also be super successful is they're social insects, right? So we have a lot of generations living within a colony. We've got old ants, we've got young ants, right? We've got brood, larva, pupa, and the constant turnover of new generations within some colonies that can live for several years. So you have this kind of, sometimes you'll hear people use the term superorganism, but it really is phenomenal how social insects divide up their jobs into these different castes that work so well together, where you can have these amazing large colonies, which we're going to talk about more. But this definitely lends to some of the reasons why we have such a hard time controlling ants, because we have hundreds, thousands sometimes of workers in a colony that is just, on top of their jobs to really, make this colony function at tip top. Ants communicate by pheromones, right? So this is kind of important from a management perspective. And I can't play a video on this console, but I'm going to describe what would happen or what you would see if I could play this video. So if you're just looking here, this particular ant, sometimes referred to as, its common name is like a turf ant, Lasius niger. This ant is picking up a yummy food source, right? And so essentially what happens is this video is this ant picks up this yummy food source, says, this is great, I want to go back and tell all my nestmates about it. So it turns around and it starts to drop a pheromone. So I always describe it, honestly, best way I can describe it is like, it's kind of like butt dabbing. As it goes along every couple inches, it literally takes the end of his abdomen, its butt essentially, and it will just drop his butt every couple of inches, and it's releasing pheromone as it's walking along that white piece of paper. And from a management perspective, when we talk about, all right, when we want to put a bait down, we want to put this bait near a foraging trail. And then don't use a repellent insecticide, obviously, around your baits. But also, if you're trying to get insects to actually cross a barrier, go to a bait. If you put that non-repellent down, you disturb that trail, you're really disturbing their pheromones, the way these ants communicate, and they can no longer pick up that foraging trail to go get your bait. So it's important to kind of understand, all right, we talk about foraging trails, we know we should follow them, try to find the colony, but what it technically is that foraging trail? Well, it's a bunch of pheromones they've laid down, and every time you see those ants crossing over it, they're all dropping pheromone, continuously rebuilding up those pheromones to tell ants, hey, there's this great food, let's take it back. And I'm so sorry, hate to break it to all the guys on this call here, but in the ant world, females really do rule the nest. And males actually don't serve much of a purpose. Their sole purpose in the ant world life is to mate, and then they die. So we do see some winged males in this picture, right? So we have reproductives. The males would be, there are some male reproductives, right, for mating, and then they die off. So within the nest, all those other jobs that ants have to perform, like colony maintenance, rebuilding the colony, brood care, even defense of the colony, all those workers, queen, of course, everything you see in an ant colony is actually a female. Ant colonies can have either one queen. The scientific term for that is monogyne, mono meaning one. And then we have colonies that are way more tricky that are called polygyne, so where they can have multiple queens within a colony. And there's some traits sometimes kind of associated with these two different types of queen colonies, I guess you can say. A lot of times the monogyne colonies don't play well with others. They can be more aggressive and territorial. Not surprisingly, they have a shorter colony life. But just think, right? They just have one queen. When that queen dies off, there's not a replacement queen there, so that colony will die off if the queen dies off. In these colonies where you have multiple queens, the colonies can survive a much longer time because, again, we have a lot of queens there. One queen dies off, it doesn't matter. We've got more queens within that colony to continue and help that colony continue to survive. And worker size is going to be important for ID, and we're going to jump into some identification here. But in the field quickly, it really helps to know what the worker size is. There are some ant species that are actually dimorphic. So here you see short Kevin Hart with the rock, obviously much taller. So two different sizes of workers. Monomorphic, here we've got these twins depicting same size within the colony. And then we can have workers that are a lot of different sizes, like carpenter ants, or polymorphic. And it's kind of interesting. There was this recent paper that came out because when we think of like an individual ant within a colony, a lot of times, especially in monomorphic, so all the same size colonies, I kind of always had this picture in my head, like one ant has one specific job and it just does that job and it knows exactly what to do. But some recent research actually showed they did, it's kind of fun. The ants were very colorful, but what they did is like every time one ant would do a job, they put paint color on it that was specific to a task. And there were different colors of paint depending on different tasks. And then by the end of this study, a lot of these ants had like 5 different colors. So what they found is in these kind of monomorphic colonies, a lot of the ants where I thought, all right, they just do one thing. No, they can do a lot of the different tasks needed within the colony. But when you get these polymorphic workers, nothing in the insect world is a rule. There's always an exception. But sometimes some of the smaller workers can be the ones that guard aphids and collect honeydew. Medium ones may actually defend the colony and work on nest excavation, so more on that colony maintenance. And then you can also get larger workers that may go out and forage. And I also have to note here that ants are not too nice to the elderly. They are not respectful of their elderly. A lot of times, ant colonies will send out their old ladies, the old workers, the old females out into the world to forage because, I mean, technically, they get older, the more expendable, right? They may not be around that long. So they're like, send out the old ones to go out and forage. We have two types of nests. And again, all this is going to be super important from a biology perspective. We have some ants that just have one nest, right? Monodomous, if they have just one ant, or I'm sorry, one nest, should be more simple to control. But when we get into situations with the ants with multiple queens and multiple nests, that is called polydomous. Domus meaning home, so meaning homes, where you can have a main nest and satellite nests, and where these colonies can like really grow and take over an area. And you also may ask yourself, well, how the heck did this colony get there? And, you know, all of us were super familiar with swarming, right? So this is where we have the wing dance, the reproductive males and females swarm off, fly off to start a colony somewhere else. Excuse me. Occasionally, we'll have ants, especially if you disturb a colony. Sometimes they'll just pick up and move for whatever reason. There's not enough resources. This site is no longer a prime site for whatever their needs are. They may pick up and move. And then we also have budding. So where a queen will travel off with some of the brood meaning the immatures, right? Larva, pupa, eggs. But essentially that queen will take off with some members of the colony and start a new colony. But these colonies still, even if they bud, still may remain in contact with each other. And one of the ants that is the most problematic as far as budding goes are the pharaoh ants. So that's why we have to be really careful. If you're dealing with a pharaoh ant infestation, I don't typically recommend any type of repellent insecticides because as soon as you kind of disturb pharaoh ants, they'll start budding, moving elsewhere, and causing you even more headaches. And I'd be remiss if everyone's starting to moan at me if I did not discuss IPM. And this is why. Before you start moaning and groaning, oh my God, we're going to go through the IPM triangle. Well, this is how I think about it. Just think about your company, right? Your company has a motto or a mission statement. And probably at a lot of your company meetings, you may be asked, what is this mission statement? Or it's covered at the beginning of every single meeting you have. Well, that's how I think about the IPM triangle, is that it needs to be your own personal motto. Everything you do should be based on IPM. And so you should be able to understand what's the triangle. Well, we want to start from the bottom and work our way up, right? Start from the bottom, work to the top. So start with those cultural prevention methods. Is there, a bunch of mulch up against the foundation? Can we rake that back? Is there heavy vegetation? Are there tree branches touching the house? All of those things that can really make lovely ant habitats. But in my experience, until you really start to understand IPM and some of the modifications we can make to the environment, is everyone wants to go to that pink line, right? They want to go straight to treatment, where I have it highlighted in pink. I've only got a few minutes at a stop. I'm seen plenty of ants. I don't know what this species is, but I'm going to throw down my XYZ product. Let's just say a fipronil product. I'm good to go. Well, no, that needs to be our last step. We're going to go to treatment last. So what we really need to focus on and not jump over so quickly is identification and monitoring. Because if you want to reduce callbacks, if you want to be more effective, if you want to be at the top of your game and a true professional, this is where you need to spend your time. So a lot of times I will get questions. I still get pictures, got a lot of friends in the industry, a lot of PMPs that I talk to, and I'll get pictures of pests. And occasionally I get a picture like this and they're freaking out. They're like, I've had this ant issue, it's driving me nuts. Can you identify this ant? And this is where I have to say, I'm sorry, but your guess is literally as good as mine. I can tell you that's an ant. It looks like I can actually see the thin waist, so I could say that's an ant. I'm not going to be able to get you anywhere else just based on this picture. So this is where I'm going to ask, can you get me a clearer picture? Tell me about biology. Where are you located geographically? Because, you know, I work with PMPs across the country. Are you seeing other signs? You know, there's tons more questions to kind of get us where we need to be with ID. But I also have noticed is in a lot of presentations, when we're talking about identification, a lot of times it's like, hey, you know what? Get yourself a good book, and then someone will put some pictures up. Here's the good books. Here's some good resources. And we always tend to, as speakers, as trainers, unless you're doing like a master class with microscopes, because identification really is like next level professionalism, where I really would like all of us to be in this industry. And if you're not there and you're just starting out in the industry, it's where I want you to be. And it's taken me a very long time to get there also, is to know how to properly identify insects. And there's really, I honestly believe, a lack of teaching sometimes with that industry. We're like, all right, you've got to identify your ants, the most important step, and ants really tedious. So, you know, you got to do that in your free time. So I'm going to try to make it easy for you. So this is the kind of picture, if you can get me a picture like this, I'm going to be able to get a lot further with you, because it's not so blurry, right? It's still not high level. This is a picture that I took with my own microscope. You may ask me, what is it? And I'm going to tell you, it's like obsolete these days. I've had this thing for like over 10 years. It plugs into my computer, but to emphasize how obsolete, like the software literally came on a CD, right? Nothing comes on CDs anymore. It's like plug and play with USB. So it's older equipment, but I still use it. It still works great, and it will actually magnify anywhere from 40 times to 140 times. So it can get me, especially for like main structural species, anything that's like, I mean, there's 12,000 species of ants. So if you send me just a random ant because you're curious, if it's not a structural ant, I may need some very specific books to get there on any idea on that. But like a main structural pest, I know the key identifiers. This is going to get me where I need to be. So I wanted to walk you through this. So this is where we're going to sift through the nonsense, and I'm going to teach you very quickly how to get to node sense. How do we identify that ant? I'm going to give you those resources. For those of you that have been in the industry forever, you might be okay with doing some decent site ID. Also understanding the characteristics. But for those of you that haven't had experience, we always need a refresher too. I'm going to teach you a quick and easy way to get there. So how do we do that? First step is you have to get yourself a key. This is an identification key. So a good key that I am going to recommend that is super easy is this one that I found on Purdue University. So this is the link. I know that's a long link, but if you try to Google Purdue ant species something, if it doesn't come up, just shoot me an email. I've got the PDF. I'd be happy to share this with you. But I like this resource. There's other resources I've used from other extension and universities that I really like too. This just happens to be the one that we're going to learn on today because it's 2 pages. And it covers 21 ant species, 21 of the ant species that you may interfere or interact with around structures all throughout the United States. So it's also pretty broad. So we've got ants that are in the southeast, northeast, you know, middle of the country, some that are even out west. So it's also pretty broad too. That's another reason why I like it. First thing we have to do on this ID key, and this is where we get into nodes. And don't let this word petiole confuse you. Petiole is the same word as nodes. They mean the same thing. You may see that word. If we go back here, you'll see petiole single. I think I can draw on this thing. So here you see petiole single, petiole double. Don't let that throw you off. That's the same as a node. So we got 2 pages here. So the first thing we have to do is we have to figure out, do we have a single node or a double node, 2 nodes? Here in this picture, we have, well, my circle's a little wonky there, but we've got 2 nodes. So these 2 things that look like camel humps are going to be your nodes. So if we go back and let's look at our sample ant here. I know in real time I could move this leg, but this leg just would not get out of my way when I was trying to take this picture. But we have 2 nodes here, 1, 2. So if we went back to our key here, we either start on page 1 where it says petiole single, but we know we have 2 nodes. That's petiole double. So you're going to skip that first page and you're going to go straight to petiole double. And then when you go from petiole double, that's a mouthful. That's why I go to node. When we go to double nodes, we have 2 choices. You're going to start from the very top of this page and work your way down to the bottom. So let me show you what that means. Excuse me. Got our ant here. We know that we have 2 nodes, so we know we're going to start on page 2, and then we're going to go and choose either the red side or the blue side. So the very first option, you're working your way from the top to the bottom, is called a 2 choice. You got 2 choices here. Am I either going to choose red or blue? So red means, excuse me, that the thorax has 1 or more spines. Blue here says that the thorax doesn't have any spines. So let's go back and look at our ant. And I've circled here. You can clearly see on the thorax, right? Insects have a head, thorax, abdomen, 3 body parts. On that thorax, there's definitely 2 spines. So if we go back here, you are going to choose the red side. We're going to ignore the blue side completely. That's not what we have. We have a thorax with 1 or more pair of spines. So then we're going to go down, follow this arrow to the next 2 options. All right, so what are those next 2 options? We figured out we got spines. Well, now we got to figure out how many spines do we have? Do we have a thorax with 3 pairs of spines, and even has this pretty little picture showing you 3 pairs all up and down the thorax? Or do we have a thorax with only 1 pair of spines? Let's go look at our picture. Here you can clearly see along that thorax, we only have 1 pair of spines there at the bottom of the thorax. Okay, so we're going to keep going right down that red side. What's our next question? What's our next 2 choices? This one's tricky. Not going to lie here, it's tricky, and my picture that I took is not amazing. Excuse me. Okay, so our option here is the pedicel. Again, don't let that confuse you. The pedicels basically do those nodes. That second node, does it attach to the top of the abdomen, or does it attach to the front? It kind of looks like more like it's attached in the middle. Let's go look at our ant. Again, I could manipulate this in real time, but this is as good of a picture that I was going to get. So it's kind of hard to tell, but that node there is not attached at the top. It's attached at the front, kind of in the middle. So let me show you with some entomologists that take way better pictures, that have way more fancy microscope equipment, what that looks like. On the left, you have an acrobat ant. There you can see that node is attached to the top there. And then to the right, we have our ant, another picture of our ant. And if you just look at that node, let me go back to drawing here. Let's look at this node. You can clearly see it's kind of attached to the front, not at the top like this one. So let's keep going. So let's see, what option do we have? We don't want to do the one to the top. That would have told us we had an acrobat ant. We know that our pedicel, those nodes, are attached to the front. So let's keep going here, see what our next options are. Okay, our next option is, does the head have a brush of long bristles underneath it? So you're kind of looking for a beard on an ant. Or does the head have no bristles? Let's go look at our ant. All right, if you look at this head, you're kind of like looking at the chin area. This is where you would see the hair. As you can see, this ant has no beard. It is not a hairy ant here. We don't have hairs, so we know we do not have a harvester ant. So we're going to continue on down, and now we only have 2 options. So it's either one or the other. We either have a big-headed or a pavement ant, and some of you are already probably internally screaming at me. You've known the answer for 5 minutes. And that's okay. I'm glad that you're already on top of your ID. Okay, so does our ant have ridges? You see these lines here, essentially, head and thorax covered in ridges, these lines, or no ridges, and noticeably large heads. Big-headed ants, they're easy because you'll have some workers that have these big old heads, and that will give it away for big-headed ants. So let's go look at our ant and see if we have ridges. Again, I know the coloration is a little bit difficult. I will tell you, we do have ridges. So yes, if you were saying the whole time, Brittany, it's a pavement ant, you were absolutely correct. And again, let's go back to our entomologists who have great microscopes here. And here you can really see, you see those ridges there on the head, another picture to the right with the ridges on the thorax and head. So that is what you are looking for. And so in, I don't even know, like 5 minutes or less, we just identify one of the most common ants in the United States. And we use a super easy key to get there if we needed help. Okay, let's take a quick break. Please, in your chat box, for those of you that need your state CEU license credits, take this time now for our team to type in the code word, NODE, N-O-D-E. All right, type in that code word NODE. Lou, I see you're with me. He's telling me that you can eat those honey pot repletes. That's great. If any of you get a chance to do that, I've done it once. It's just honey, right? Not too bad. Someone had music playing. That's fun. All right, awesome. We got some good stuff in there. Give it a few more seconds, please. If you need CEU credits, type in that word NODE, N-O-D-E. All right, let's keep chugging along here. Hopefully that's enough time. Get your code word in there. All right, so you may have said, this is all well and good, Brittany, but what if I'm in the field? I'm really trying to figure this out really quickly. What can I do? Well, so what I did is I went out and I have this little, I call it a hand lens. I guess it's still a hand lens, little magnifying glass thing. I actually really like this one. Don't ask me where I got it. I can't tell you where I got it. It's another thing I've had for years to play with. But I like it because it has like this little cup on it that I can put on top of bugs, and then it kind of holds them so I can look at them. And then sometimes when they move around too much, I just, you know, put them in a freezer or something, kill them so they'll stop moving. But this got me about 8 times magnification. So then I tried to take my phone and take a picture of the magnification. So it's not amazing, but guess what? I have an ant here, and it is a pavement ant. I will tell you, it's hard to see, but right here, I could see once I put my, you know, without the phone, with my eyeballs when I was using it, I could see the 2 nodes and I could see the ridges. So this is what I'm saying, we're practice. If you just take a little bit of time to understand what are those main characteristics, and once you spend time with your ants, say if your office has specimens and microscopes, spend a little bit of time with them, it's going to get easier, because guess what? Now I know, already I have it memorized over time, I know pavement ants have 2 nodes and they have ridges on their head. If I see an ant, and also displaced soil and other things we're going to get into, immediately I know I'm dealing with a pavement ant. And for this particular situation, just let me tell you what's going on with this house. So with this house, essentially they were having ants very sporadically. There were no trails in the house, very sporadically popping up in the kitchen, popping up in one of the bathrooms in the hallway, but there were no trails to follow. It was sporadic, little tiny ants. So, you know, could have been a little black ant, could have been a thief ant, could have been a, who knows, you know, odor's house ant. So, of course, without proper ID, could not know what was inside. So I get this ant, get it in a microscope. I'm like, oh, these are pavement ants. So I really need to focus my time. They're obviously foraging in, just kind of looking around. Nothing as significantly has caused this trail yet, but I knew that I needed to focus all my time outdoors, that I really needed to solve this problem outside, probably. So here you go. And this is why it's important to identify your ant. If I have these 1 or 2 ants, no significant trails to follow, I don't know what's going on. Well, then identifying my key tells me the biology. So I know that pavement ants are typically, just by the name, associated with concrete, driveways, sidewalks, under pavement, slabs, rocks, stuff like that. Occasionally will forage indoors. So this led me to start asking, if you did not see this on your inspection right off the bat, I was like, okay, what's happening outdoors with this account? Let's take a look around. Well, you started looking around, you see it pretty quick. And this is going to be with a few ant species, but that displacement of soil, anytime you see displacement of soil when you're walking around doing your inspection, you should start thinking, I need to focus on this area. So as I'm walking around in the front of the house, there's displacement of soil along this driveway. You see that crack. Pavement ants are underneath, kind of coming up out of that crack. And then in the backyard, out on these pavers, this deck area, I have it circled in that middle picture. There's a ton of displaced soil coming up in between those pavers. And they had put that like polymeric sand down that kind of hardens. So it's not like you can easily get these pavers up to do a treatment. And then by the flower pot too, you can see circled more of that displaced soil. So again, this was all pavement ants. And then don't forget flower pots. Flower pots are another biggie that you want to look at and inspect. Pick up those flower pots, look underneath them, because underneath this flower pot, they had also gotten into the flower pot, were moving some of that soil down, and there was a colony hanging out just below that flower pot. So they had a significant activity throughout this house. And in that middle picture, where you see that displaced soil along the foundation and that siding there, right on the other side of that wall was the kitchen. So not surprisingly, occasionally some of these ants wandering around just looking for food or water, just sometimes find a nice little crack pop into the house. So for this instance, this is just a product that we have. It's an indoxacar product. I know it says fire ant bait. It is a product labeled for pavement ants. And just like I mentioned, I didn't, if I wanted to try to like drench a colony or something, I could have tried around those areas, could put down a liquid, but I couldn't really pull up the pavers. So for in this instance, we put out this bait. And obviously, you would not, while you're out doing a treatment, put on tile. The tile is just to make pretty pictures for all of you to see that with this baiting is going to be a great option, right, for pavement ants, just FYI. But with this bait, they started, put it down on this tile, and within minutes, they started picking up the bait. You can see an ant here picking up one of the granules and taking it back to their colony. So I went back. With an indoxacarb formulation, it's not going to be immediate, but we don't want our baits to be immediate, right? We want to give the ants a chance to pick up that bait, take it back to the colony, and allow that through trophallaxis, the ants feeding each other, allow that bait to spread within that colony. So after about 15 hours later, all that bait was gone. But there was still some activity. So I went back 48 hours later, about 2 days after I was here. Those are all dead ants. So there was no activity. I, kind of brushed the mound around, tried to see if anything was alive. Everything was dead, no activity. So baits work pretty well for pavement ants. Something else really important to understand about ants is the fact that they follow guidelines. So just think about humans. We follow guidelines, right? Like we have our highways. If you're out hiking, you're going to follow a path in the woods. You're going to follow a sidewalk. And as my husband would probably say, unless you're a psychopath, you're going to follow a sidewalk, because who just walks straight down and makes new paths in people's grass? My husband loves his grass, so that's why I was saying he would call me a psychopath if I just stopped following any sidewalks. Well, ants are kind of the same. They are going to follow guidelines. So in this particular picture, I didn't take this picture. This is Dan Suter, an entomologist at UGA that I have so much respect for. But essentially in this picture, Dan was describing, you have this tree here, and there was a carpenter ant nest in this tree, and then the ants followed this blue little trail. They hit this concrete wall. This concrete wall, of course, is the guideline is following. So straight line up this concrete wall. Then they follow all the way to the end of the concrete wall, go around the side of this building, and then they found a trash can there. So they're essentially foraging from their nest in that tree up the concrete wall to the trash can. So focusing on guidelines, cracks, along the foundation walls, anywhere that creates a natural guideline is, hoses, electrical wires even. Ants will follow those as a natural guideline for when they trail. So let's talk a little bit, since, that was a carpenter ant nest, let's talk a little bit about carpenter ants. And I'm not going to walk you through the entire identification process again, just because as much as I would love to spend the rest of my day, I don't think all of you want to spend 8 hours with me today doing just straight identification. So I kind of gave you the basic tools, but I'm always happy to help anyone. But quick identification, if you were to get out your chart, this is what it's going to start kind of taking you towards the end of your carpenter ant. But it's super easy, right? If I start seeing big ants, probably going to be a carpenter ant. This black carpenter ant, Camponotus pennsylvanicus, is what you're looking at. It has one node. You see that one node? It looks like a mountain peak there in between the thorax and abdomen. And another telltale sign with carpenter ants, if you look at that thorax, I can't draw, but that thorax is round. In other species, you may have like a little gap like this or something. It's not evenly rounded. So carpenter ants have this nice round, like a mounded thorax. And carpenter ants are polymorphic. So again, why it's important to remember some of these characteristics. And I'll be honest, I sometimes can't remember, is this ant monomorphic, polymorphic? I can't memorize it all. So one resource I'll tell you real quick about that I do really like is on my phone. It's an app called the NPMA Field Guide. And it has a ton of pest ants and a ton of species that you deal with. And it'll have like just in a few paragraphs, very quick, like ID. It'll tell you, what size are the workers, how many queens. So if you're out in the field and you're like, okay, I think I have Odor's house ant, but I can't remember, are they monomorphic? I see a bunch of monomorphic. So, and it also has treatment stuff. So again, in the field for quick stuff, it's like you have this whole identification treatment book, amazing book that was created by another entomologist that unfortunately recently passed, Eric Smith, put so much time into that. An excellent resource. It's an amazing book now that's been put onto your phone. So anyways, that was just a quick side note. But carpenter ants have polymorphic workers. So you can see all these workers that are different sizes in this left-hand picture. These carpenter ants were up in an attic. Someone was storing like wood, I don't know, pieces of wood. I don't know what they were, shingles or something. But storing pieces of wood where carpenter ants had moved in and put their built their colony there. They do have one queen. However, they're polydomous. So you have a parent nest and a satellite nest. And real quick, I just very recently, one of the pest control companies, Green Pest Solutions, I went out and they did this awesome workshop. So got their permission. I took a picture of just some very common wood damage. So real quick, in your mind, see if you know which one is carpenter ant damage. If you said the top right one, you are correct. So carpenter ants do not eat wood, right? They do not consume cellulose. They nest in wood. So they just chew up that wood, but they're not consuming it. Top middle, of course, the carpenter bee has those really round holes. We have some weathered wood, looks kind of like moldy green. Bottom left, we have some type of powder post beetle, tiny holes, beetles popped out of. We got some wood rot. And then termite damage, while it looks semi-similar, if you see soil in that wood like that, then you know you're dealing with termites, right? So here's a close-up of what the tunnels and galleries look like. If you just see some damage, you're trying to figure out what potentially caused it. Again, you're not going to see the soil in the damage like you would with termites, and they're very smooth. In carpenter ants, you can see they're kind of like seem to be eating in different directions, so they can eat across the grain, with the grain. I keep saying eat, I'm sorry. Excavate. Excavate would be the right word because they're not eating it, right? But it has this like sandy-like appearance, essentially. I particularly like this study and this graph because I do often get, one of the questions is, well, what kind of bait should I choose? And the answer is let the ants tell you, and this is why. So with carpenter ants, but this applies to other ant species, but I just love this graph. They did this really cool study. So starting you look at the bottom of the graph here, June 11th, all the way to August, and they looked at food preference of carpenter ants. And so you'll see here they had two options, honey or mealworm. So honey would be a sweet preference. Mealworm would be your protein preference, right? So from June 11th till about July 6th, you can see there's a huge preference here for mealworms. That would be protein source. So early on in the season, what are they doing? Those ants are reproducing. Queen is producing more eggs. So there's a lot more need for the colony to have protein source. But then later in the season, it switches, the needs of the colony switch, and then they have more of a preference for honey. So this is why, because sometimes you'll hear, especially other house ants prefer sweets. Yes, they do prefer sweets. Or this ant prefers this. Well, yeah, sometimes there may be a little bit more of a preference towards that, but it can totally change with the season. So this is why it's important. What I'll do is sometimes I'll put like if I'm going gel bait, 3 different gel baits on an index card, leave it alone for a few minutes, walk off, do something else I need to do on account, come back and just let the ants tell me. If they're all swarming to my middle bait, well, that's the bait I'm going to give the ants. Or if I'm curious, will they accept this granular bait? Well, put it out and see before you go like wild doing your full application. The ants can do a lot of the work for you. Already kind of talked about parent and satellite nests. Because carpenter ants don't have multiple queens, that queen is going to be housed in that parent nest. But you can have other satellite nests, especially once that colony establishes. It gets older over time. That's where you'll start getting satellite nests moving on. As the colony gets so big, then they need to move on to other resources. So we can have satellite colonies 750 feet away from that parent nest. So that's why it's really important to, when you're doing your inspection, you are going to look for wood that has been impacted by moisture, right? But don't forget that colony could that colony could be have satellite nests and could be elsewhere and outside as well. Quick announcement here. It sounds like maybe some people were looking for a chat box. If you can't find the chat box here, technical team is saying Q&A is fine for code words, so don't stress about that, everyone, please. I apologize if I said chat box, but we'll, no matter what, whatever box you type it into there, we'll make sure you get your credits. Okay, back to carpenter ant nests. This was kind of interesting because this was like a large scale study. And a lot of times when we're doing research, we can't really do these huge field surveys. So this one was cool because they looked at an area that was like 233 hectares in size. And what they found is that 348 of over 1,000 trees were infested with carpenter ants. But what was most interesting to me was in areas that had been more urbanized, where you'd cut down more trees, right? Where there were fewer trees, it was more likely that carpenter ants would be nesting in those trees. And I had always kind of thought, all right, carpenter ants are probably just associated with dead wood, which they will like that dead wood and, wood that's been in homes that has moisture issues because it's easier for them to excavate that wood. But they also will be in live trees and not necessarily, even if they're in those live trees, impact those leaves trees negatively. Excuse me. Last but not least, just a quick note here on one carpenter ant situation. This particular house, this is a cabin. Homeowners were coming about every 2 weeks. Every time they show up 2 weeks, they find these dead ant bodies. I know it's a little bit hard to see, but literally everything, all those little spots all along this area, this is just piles and piles of dead carpenter ants. And so they tried some bait, had done a couple things, but ultimately I had to go in and at nighttime, because carpenter ants are more active at nighttime, couldn't figure out where they were coming from. And so what I found when I went out nighttime is there's actually tons of trails on the outside of this door Leading back to the outside of the house, there's some stairs over here that you can't see, and then there's like this little crack here that went into a wall void where all the ants were coming out of. So all I did is I took, this is a foaming product that we have that contains 2 non-repellents, fipronil, imidacloprid. I foamed that wall void, and that took care of the issue there. Just real quick, get back into our node sense here. If you do run into, again, I want to give you just a few more tips on identification if you all are jazzed about this PDF and trying to use it, because you may run into some stuff and you may say, what in the heck does that mean? All right, so circular fringe of hairs on the abdomen. Well, what does that look like? What does that mean? The scape is longer than the height of the head. What the heck is a scape? Granted, do look at these pictures too, it helps a lot. Antennae composed of 10 segments. Well, how do I count that? Okay, well, let me show you real quick. Right off the bat, ants do have elbowed antennae. So if you're dealing with swarming insects, don't know if it's an ant or termite, look at the wings. Of course, termites have wings that are same length, but the antennae are elbowed in ants. And so you may get this question that says, what about the length of the scape? This is the scape. It's the first antennal segment attached to the head here. So let me show you an example. If it says the scape is longer than the length of the head, which is true for this black crazy ant, look at this thing. It's super long. If I were to take that, it's clearly longer than the length of the head. So that's what you're looking for if you ever see that on a key. Then you may also see a club. Club is just going to be like this fattened section at the end of the antennae. Sometimes it may want you to count 1, 2 clubs. So that's what that means. How do you count those antennal segments? Because this is going to be important for some ants too. Don't forget about your scape. This is always number 1, and then you go from the scape to the bottom. So from 1, in this ant, we have 12 antennal segments. And then you may see this terminology sometimes in a pseudopore. Be straight up, let's make it easy. An pseudopore is literally hairs around the anus. So this right here is what you're looking for if it starts talking about a fringe of hairs on the tip of the abdomen. You're looking for anal hairs, essentially. Okay, here we go. In whatever box that you can find access to, Q&A is fine. Let's type in that second code word to get your CEUs. Type in ant, give you a few seconds because we have just a few more slides to get through here. Again, if you were zoning out, went to go get something to drink real quick, please type in that code word ant. Let's make sure you get your credits for hanging out today. Okay, let's move on. Okay, real quick, I'm just going to test you guys just for fun. And I guarantee you no one's going to know the answer based on this first characteristic. Do you know the ant? There are no circle of hairs on the anus of this ant. If anyone knows it right now, I would give you $20. Or if someone actually does know it, I would give you $20 right now if you name the right ant. This ant has many nests and many queens. And this one's probably really going to give it away. There's a few ants that might have this one node that's hidden. But if you were saying to yourself that it's the odorous house ant, Taponoma sessile, then you are correct. That node is hidden here. And by hidden, if you're looking from the top, you wouldn't be able to see that node, right? Because it's below that abdomen. And they have 12 segmented antennae. If you took the time, we'd start from the scape, 1. This will get you to 12. And do you think there's a club here? This one's tricky. And it's tricky because it's actually gotten me one time. This is actually not a club. So while it looks a little bit thicker, the club is going to be very distinct if you do see that in ants. They are monomorphic, right? So we have some ants. They're all the same size, feeding on this honey. And odorous house ants, these are some odorous house ants. We always talk about them guarding and like herding around aphids. These are some that were guarding scale insects that still produce honey. So this is why it's important sometimes to, not only control the ant, but its food source as well. And they are opportunistic nesters. So they'll take an opportunity, and we'll talk a little bit about this just to wrap up, to nest under anything. So rocks, mulch, logs, bark. I mean, all got pots around the house. So that's where it can get kind of tricky when we start thinking about these ants. You've probably heard of tramp ants, typically called invasive, but the odorous house ant's native. It still gets lumped in here because tramp ants typically are polygynous. They have many queens, many nests, and they're not aggressive towards each other either within their own species, even if there's different colonies. So this is Tony crazy ants. All those dead bodies are Tony crazy ants. So where you get these high numbers, many queens, many nests, these can be like the most difficult ants to control. And when you have polydamas, I'm sorry, my sister's the artist in the family, so this is what you get. My stars are hypothetical ant nests. This is where we really have to go around the property. And the one thing I kind of want to leave you here is from the late and great Stoy Hedges. One time I heard him say regarding tramp ants, he was kind of talking about this, and I had always kind of been focused on ants. All right, let's just, what about perimeter spray, or get my baits indoors? And sometimes I would neglect the outer zone of the property. And with these tramp ants, where you can have these nests in all these different areas around the home, you may need a product that allows you to get away from the structure and get to those other nesting sites. And another tip that he had is, when you're going out and inspecting, turning stuff over, have your backpack ready right from the get-go. Start with your backpack so you can spray down if you find a colony right then and there. Because if you come back and you've disturbed those ants, they might start picking up and leaving before you get back. So I appreciate all of you today. I hope you got some great quick identification tips, a couple of stories in there to help you out. Remember, if you don't know what bank to use, give them options, and don't forget about those outer zones. Here's my email address again. If there is anything that you would want me to share again, questions, don't hesitate to reach out. And here is the quiz information. Hallie, did you want to cover this? Or do you want me to?
Yeah, I can take it over, Brittany. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Brittany, for a great presentation today. Now we will wrap up the live event. Thank you for attending the No Node Sense Ant Management, brought to you by PMP Magazine and our sponsor of the event, Control Solutions, Inc. As a reminder, you will have until April 16th to take the quiz. A recording of this webinar and other upcoming webinars from PMP will be posted to mypmp.net/webinars. Thank you all for attending, and we hope you'll join us again soon for another great webinar.